Bonjour, life sparklers. It's Claire. Welcome on the Integrally Alive podcast, and thanks for listening. Here we explore stories, wisdom, and tools for shifting from resistance and stress to resilience and living the life you choose. My guest today worked as an air traffic controller for 20 years, and he's a master life coach and emotional intelligence and mindfulness facilitator. He wrote a book called The Price of Heartbreak, inspired from what he calls his year from hell. And that year was also the beginning of a new chapter in his life, where he has learned from experience how getting out of his comfort zone was a key element of growth and becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable most days. He developed a method called the Aura Method, acknowledge, understand, responsibility, and action that helps people struggle emotionally. And today he is committed to sharing his journey of growth with others to inspire and connect. So you can find him on rick-sharpe.com. But without further ado, please welcome Rick Sharpe. Hello, Rick.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with you today because so much of what you share is exactly the why I'm doing this podcast. So I'm really excited for this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how many of us go through the same stuff, but because we're on different journeys, that's the interesting thing about sharing each other's journeys, because that sort of resonance with what other people are doing, it's very helpful, because then you realize you're not actually alone when you're going through whatever it is that you're going through.
Oh, yeah. So, today we will talk about depression, heartbreak, relationships, emotional intelligence, vulnerability, storytelling, and a lot more. So let's dive in. And we will talk about the importance of sharing our stories later in this interview. But first, we could maybe begin by your story, the price of the heartbreak. So what was the starting point of this adventure for writing a book and studying emotional intelligence and relationships?
Well, for my particular experience, it is actually quite interesting, because I was having a conversation with somebody at an event last summer, and she made a comment about, you accidentally wrote a book, and it was never, but seriously, it was never supposed to be a book. I was involved in a 4-year relationship, I think for the first time in my life, that I was very heavily emotionally invested in. And I didn't expect that to ever end, but it did. And this is what happens. Life is all about change. So when it did end, it really hit me very, very hard in a lot of ways I never expected. So this was new for me. And the only way I could keep myself grounded in any way, shape, or form was to write down what I was thinking, write down what was going through my head, because I was having a lot of difficulty sleeping. And, when your mind races, there's just no rest for it. And that leads to other things. But I started just writing what was in my mind and how I was feeling. But I was doing it in such a way that it was very, graphic maybe, and intense. Mm-hmm. So when I was sharing some of it with a friend of mine, and a close friend of mine, and she said, wow, like, this is really good stuff, and you should do more of it. So I guess in the first instance, I did it for myself, and that really helped the healing process. So somebody asked me once, well, how many books are you going to sell? And I said, I don't really care. I really don't. It wasn't about that in the beginning. And eventually I did decide to make that leap, and it was a leap, because I was a very private person. So what you're doing is you're putting a very personal part of your life out there for the world to see and to read, which was a very scary. And when I think about it, still a scary thing. So, but I did it. And some of the feedback was very good, in the sense that people resonated with what I was thinking. They asked themselves different questions about what they were doing in their life. And so that was kind of the icing on the cake, I think.
Yeah. So when and why did you begin journaling?
Well, I did it literally a couple of weeks after the relationship came to an end, and that was a mutual understanding agreement that we did that. Although 24 hours later, I realized it was the stupidest thing that I did up to that point in my life. Since then, that's changed as well. But and that was about 3.5 years ago. I think it was in August 2015. So, and it was, and I wasn't a journaler. Like I wasn't one of those people that journaled all the time. I know people that do that on a daily basis. And it's just something that, like I said, I had to get out of my head. And then it just took on a life of its own. So I ended up with, and it took more than a few months because there was a transformation going on there. And the thing I was encouraged about journaling, and the thing that I would encourage other people to journal, is that you have a historical path in writing that you're actually going through, so that when I reflected back on what I was journaling or what I was writing about on a particular given moment, and I look back on, for example, how I was writing and what I was feeling 6 months earlier, I could actually see a tangible growth experience unfolding, because I wasn't in that same place anymore. And I realized that I was moving along this journey that I was taking. And it was a good measuring stick, I guess, to where I had been and then where I was at that point. And that was enough motivation and encouragement for myself to keep on doing it, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I'm jumping a bit in between subjects, but I know a difficult moment is to recognize what we are going through sometimes, even before beginning the healing process, but just acknowledging, okay, this is going on in my life and I'm happy with it. And a lot of people struggle with that in the first place, so they can never go on to the healing, actually. So was the journaling helping you to get to this clarity of, okay, this is going on, and maybe getting inspiration on what to do or how to react from that?
Yeah, it was the first step. And I think that started in August, and I think it was October, about a couple of months later, when I had some encouragement from some friends to keep doing it, with the end result being that it could benefit other people, obviously. But I went to Bali for 3 weeks to finish this quote unquote book. And when I got there, I wrote for about 4 or 5 days, and then I Googled vulnerability, because we men, we suck at vulnerability, like we really do. And I came across the name of Brené Brown, and she had just written her 3rd book, and I'm a big fan of Brené Brown. So for the rest of the time I was there, I read all 3 of her books.
Okay.
Interestingly enough. So that was kind of the next step, because I realized I was kind of from my own generation, the poster boy for vulnerability and the fear of. And that was a huge eye-opening experience for me. So that was one of those things where you have to kind of look yourself in the mirror and truly accept where you are. And for some people, myself included, that was a scary thing to do. So, and in order to, I mean, you mentioned aura earlier. So in order to accept where I was, I had to understand how I got there.
Yes.
And that part was the journey for me, because I had to go back into my past. Not so much, the relationship I was in, but I had to go back into my past from a personal perspective, back to when I was a kid and growing up, and, the previous experiences I had as an adult with relationships. And you go to some scary, dark places, because there's lots of times in our lives, I mean, when things happen in your life, you just kind of ignore them, you bury them, you don't acknowledge them. And that's for a number of different reasons, where you probably weren't mature enough to, or you didn't want to, and you played the blame game and blamed other people for what happened in your life. But when you sort of peel all that back, almost like an onion, in the center, it's always you. It's always you that's there.
Yeah.
So, and I still get a little bit emotional talking about it, but some of those realizations about, things that happened in my life and people that were in my life and left. That was a hard pill to swallow, but it was a necessary one to do that, because once I did that, now I was in a position to really take responsibility for my own life.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people try to put that off on other people. I blame this happened because of this person or this situation, or because of various other things that they experienced. And again, I go back to the core reality that you're still the central person in all of those things.
Yeah,
And
the main denominator in every of your story.
Exactly.
Yes.
And people don't want to accept that. They want to run from that, which is fine. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's just what it is. And for me, I had to take that responsibility, and finally, going through those 3 phases, and a lot of people do, the one piece that was most important, and the one piece that I think people take half-heartedly, is you had to take action. You had to change. You had to realize that something had to change. Now, how to do that? And I went through a various number of things to actually get to know what I was dealing with. And that was, and the first step was taking a life coach, master life coach training, which includes NLP and these types of things. So that kind of started a journey that was more a thirst for knowledge. And sometimes my dad used to tell me, like, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. Yes. Yeah. So that triggered probably a 1.5-year process. And I'm still doing it, to be honest. One thing led to, I thought, okay, well, let's check out emotional intelligence. I love Daniel Goleman, and I read his book on emotional intelligence, which led me to a course on emotional intelligence, which, interestingly, the last half of that course was all around mindfulness. Big fan of mindfulness. And it really helped me move through that second part of what I call that kind of healing journey.
Wait, because you mentioned 3 phases, but what are they? I got lost in that.
Okay, the first one was I had to accept that where I was not acceptable for me. It was negative. It was damaging. And you look at yourself in the mirror and you need to tell yourself, like, this has to change, because it was spiraling and it was still going downhill. And that's kind of where I was in that kind of depression phase. And sometimes people that are in depression, they don't even realize it. They don't, they're just sort of going through that negative. Yeah. They're going through that flow and they don't have that answer. They don't put a name on it. Yeah. And it's just basically, life sucks every day. I don't want to get out of bed. And this is kind of my lot in life. And it, and people don't have to accept that. So that was that part. And I did accept that, I needed to change that. So the second one was basically, okay, that's great. That acceptance is great. But then you have to understand, okay, how did I get here? That was a second one. And that was a real soul searching journey in itself. And then the third one was, okay, I get that. I know why I'm here. Now I have to accept responsibility, stop blaming other people for my life and for my woes in life. And the fourth one was, okay, now what am I going to do about it? I need to do something about this, take action. And there's so much learning from that. And when you start down that journey, which I did with this coaching sort of exercise, which led me to emotional intelligence, which led me to mindfulness. And that just keeps going, because the more you learn, the more you want to learn. And I think I'm on my 3rd mindfulness course at the moment. And then you start piecing things together, because there's a thread, and I did a lot of Joe Dispenza work, and a lot of people are talking about the same stuff. The same stuff comes up, and you get to a point where you start cross-referencing everything, and it really starts to sink in. And you just wake up. Now, I don't think you wake up one day, but then you start getting this realization that, wow, all the stuff these people are talking about, it really works. Like, it really does. And it leads to a much healthier, grounded experience on a day-to-day basis if you go down that road and make that choice to say, I want to know about this stuff. I want to know about this stuff, because I need to know how the brain works, how the body works, how everything affects you physiologically. And, and there's a saying out there where stress can kill you. And that is so true in so many ways once you understand the science behind it. But
it is. No, it totally is.
And Clara, it's a lifetime journey.
Mm-mm.
It's a journey that you embark on for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But that's basically how it started.
Yeah. But what is funny is first when we face this journey and we feel like this will be a lifetime journey, first it's like a spell. Oh my God, it will never end. But then it becomes a lifestyle, and it's so great because I'm totally taking it for myself. I'm learning all the time, and I know I will be better tomorrow than today, and so on. And it's exciting. It's not daunting anymore. So
somebody said some of the paths that I've crossed. Like somebody said that my whole goal in life is to present a better version of myself tomorrow than I did today.
Yeah.
Which is empowering. And what's empowering also is that when you make all those acceptances and you say, you do have a choice. Yes. It is up to you.
Yeah.
And every morning you have that choice. Some days, and the thing is around mindfulness is that you have to be very forgiving as well, not so judgmental. We're going to have our bad days, and that's okay. You wake up in the morning and you just can't, get your stuff together, and it's okay. Tomorrow presents another chance to get it right. So we have to be very, I was going to say forgiving, but I think more to the point, it's more loving of ourselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's the one rule I have. I have only one rule in my classes and trainings. It's be kind to yourself. I've got many directions I'm coaching and guiding people with, but the only rule they cannot do any otherwise is be kind to yourself. Because we are for some reason, it's so easy for us to be nasty with ourselves more than kind. We would never do these things to other people.
It's easier because we always remember the bad things, not so much the good things. I was doing.
In one way, maybe it makes it easier to stay stuck. Like it gives us an excuse to not to change. It's a bit harsh what I'm saying, but I think sometimes we can get stuck in the story of being nasty to yourself and making excuses in the end. Whereas facing, okay, it sucked. I've done that, but I can forgive myself for doing that. Then we can move on. But it's so difficult sometimes to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean, people find it so difficult to be kind to themselves, and I really haven't put my finger on that. I mean, even when you, for example, you give a gift to somebody and they say, "Oh, you shouldn't have." Like, well, why shouldn't I have done that?
Yeah.
They find it difficult to accept compliments. And it's all part of that loving, and you don't have to be egotistical to accept the compliments. And so, thank you, I really appreciate that. That was really nice of you to say that. But people seem to, you shouldn't have said that. Like, well, why not? And that's why that whole kind of self-love thing is important, and especially for men, actually, because we really suck at that. But and it's not a and that self-love thing, it could be as simple as okay, you know what, I'm going to start going to the gym, or I'm going to start eating correctly and more healthy, and that's something you're doing for yourself. That's part of self-love. It doesn't mean that you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you, I love you, I love you. And that men, you bring that up with a man, he's going to go the other way. But and it's very simple things that you can do that is still categorically self-love, if that makes sense.
Totally. And then how do you make the difference between love for ourselves and self-complacency in some way? Because you were saying, for example, some mornings when you are going through depression, it just feels like I don't want to go out of my bed. And some days you need to be loving to yourself and say, hey, take it easy and so on. And maybe another day it's just an excuse you're making, and there is another way to react. So how do you differentiate the two?
Oh yeah, good question. I mean, I think my experience was that when I was in there, like I really didn't want to get out of bed, and there were days that I didn't. And it does run in cycles, and it was almost like I just roll over and just watch the numbers ticking over on the clock. And then, of course, when the sun went down, that was just an excuse to say, well, I don't have to get out of bed now because it's dark again. And that's a huge fight. I mean, even just to get out of bed. And then there was other days where I did get out of bed and I made it as far as the kitchen, to make a bite to eat, or in front of the TV. Okay, well, that's progress in a way, that I got out of the bedroom and got to the living room, but I didn't do much beyond that. And, there's a huge role. I mean, people use numbing for different things, and I used it from an alcohol perspective. And I would sit there sometimes in the dark and I would drink, knowing full well that I'm going to a place that's darker. I'm going to a place that's not going to make any sense. And I did it willingly. Most people are fairly intelligent, and I knew that when I woke up in the morning on the couch, it wouldn't be any better than it was yesterday. Actually, I'd be feeling more terrible physically, and that sort of added to that kind of darkness. And some people, depending obviously on their personalities, they can't get away from that, and it just sucks them down this dark tube. And depending on who you have in your life, obviously at that point I was alone. Depending on who you have in your life, family, etc. My family lived 5,000 miles away, etc. So, there's can be some sort of light at the end of the tunnel, but every now and then I would say, okay, I need to get out. And I was living in Dubai at the time. So, I mean, every day is sunny in Dubai, which is great for you and from a personal perspective. And I would still get out of bed and get dressed and go outside, and it would feel good for a day or two. And then, I'll go back and, thinking there was light in the tunnel, like having, more alcohol, and then I would slip back again. And that was a cycle. But it was a cycle where you were kind of getting to the sort of the rim of the hole you were in and not quite getting out of it. And that was a conscious decision that I had to really make, because there was a couple of friends of mine that were very concerned, and they expressed that concern. And I realized, wow, like, they're seeing more than I'm seeing, because you can get tunnel vision, and you do get tunnel vision. And I just woke up one morning, looked at myself in the mirror, and it's almost like I didn't recognize that person that I was looking at anymore. And there's something, I mean, we have this deep-rooted, most people have this deep-rooted thing inside them around survival. And I that just kind of came to the surface, and I had to do something. And I did. And part of that was, okay, every day I'm getting out of bed, I'm getting dressed, I'm getting showered, I'm going out the door. And that was a good start, because I was making those steps physically to get myself out there. I'm going to go spend time with my friends. I'm going to talk to them. And when I started talking to them, and it comes up that, I haven't seen you for a while, what's going on? Because they always ask you, like, how are things? And then when I started really being honest with a couple, I mean, you don't tell everybody your story, they don't deserve it, but some of my closer friends, I said, well, it's really sucked these last couple of months, 3 months, whatever. And then I started telling what I was feeling and telling how I got there. And because I was never one to talk about what I felt, that was a huge change for me. And the more I did it, the more strength I got, and the more motivation I got to talk about it. So, I mean, just being here with you now, I mean, I share that openly now, because the more you do it, the easier it becomes, because there's nobody going to come back at you and say you're doing something that's not helpful for yourself. Quick example, after I wrote the book, it was published, I went out to dinner with some friends, and there was a guy there, he's an airline pilot, it's kind of one of those alpha male environments, and air traffic control was the same, actually. So, and I heard you wrote a book. I said, well, yeah, sort of. Well, what was it? And the first thing people say was, what was it about?
Sure.
And as a guy speaking to another guy, I was like fumbling around, and I was hesitating. I didn't really want to tell him that it was about me expressing my feelings after a breakup. I mean, that just didn't sound too male oriented. And then I just said, look, okay, you know what? I just gave up trying to explain it in wishy-washy ways. I said, look, you know what? I was in love with this woman deeply. We went our separate ways. It affected me in a way I had never expected. And I went through heartbreak, depression, and I wrote about it. And through that exercise, I actually found myself on a road to a better place. And he says, yeah, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, yeah, I've been there. I've done that, like, and that was a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
So at no point did he actually say, you need to grow up. You need to be a man. Suck it up. Get on with it. That never happened. And I realized that more and more men are actually getting to that point where it's okay to talk about what you feel. So that part was really interesting.
Yeah, it's something I see and I hear and keep hearing more and more, that people are so afraid of speaking out, and that was my case as well.
Yeah.
About my story.
Mm-hmm.
My father suicided when I was 8.
Oh.
And I could feel, when you want to empty a room, you
Yeah.
come and you say depression. If it's not enough, you say suicide, and you're sure to have the room for yourself.
Yeah.
So that was my story of people asking me, and when you're 8, a lot of people ask you what your daddy is doing. And if I was answering suicide, the relationship would change.
Yeah.
So I kept that story for myself a lot, and I learned it taught me not to be authentic. So I was saying he had an accident, which was kind of true, but not really exactly true.
Yeah.
And when I finally allowed myself to be true to myself, that was such a relief. And we fear the rejection or the for the others, but the first who speaks allow all the other ones to pick up. It's so dramatic. It's like we are all waiting for someone to understand us, but we can't be understood unless we speak, right?
So true. And I've been in many situations where sometimes I'm saying something in a room that everybody is thinking but not saying for whatever fears they have. And that just opens up the floodgates, because now everybody can't talk enough. You just kind of open that door, and the floodgates are, wow. And everybody, I know. Like, I understand what you're saying. Oh, yeah. And I mean, suicide, that whole kind of subject is dear to me, in the sense that, and my daughter doesn't mind me talking about this, because she believes in raising awareness on the subject. But she was 18, and she was in, and I got a text message. Luckily, I was back in North America at the time. And the text message was basically like, from my ex-wife, where our daughter is in 72-hour suicide lockdown. And as a parent, wow, like, that does something to you. And I had to drive 12 hours all through the night to get to where she was, and by myself at night, drinking cheap gas station coffee just to stay awake. But there was no way I was going to fall asleep, because I had this kind of mission to get to where she was. And during that drive, as a human being, you wonder, like, why didn't I see that? Why didn't I sense that coming? Like, why didn't I do something better? Or how did I fail? And all these things go through your head. But the interesting thing, if you talk to people that know close friends or family members, and I realized that you were 8, but and I had a personal friend of mine. It happened 3 years ago as well, in the UK. And when you talk to the people that are closest to those that go through with this kind of deal, they had no clue.
Yeah,
we're so good at hiding how we feel, and the torment. And I tell people, when you mentioned about being kind, you have no idea what other people what other people's stories are. And if you get on the subway and you're on the way, for example, into Metro London, and I can guarantee you that 9 people out of 10 standing around you is going through something, and if they cut you off getting onto the train for whatever reason, we get upset with them, and it's better to be kind and allow them that, because you have no idea what's happening in their life, and nor will you. And but if you kind of spread that kindness, that could make a huge difference in somebody's day and in their life. You have no idea. Well, a perfect stranger is kind to you, and 24 hours earlier you were thinking about letting all this go and for good, and that just might make the difference in somebody's life, much less their day. And I think that's a very powerful message for people to be kind on a regular basis to each other, because we get caught up in automatic in our own strife and our own confusion and depression and stress, and we forget that there's 7 billion people on this planet. So
yeah, completely. But you talk a lot about because this is a universal stuff. We all hide our stories, and we fear of being rejected and so on. But there is something specific with men. It's not easy for anyone to share our feelings and so, but it seems to be even more complicated for men, because the society builds up these expectations of.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, we have these expectations, especially in my generation, where a man needs to be this, a man needs to be that. They write songs about it. Big men don't cry. And when you're growing up, your father was always passing along that kind of mindset. You'd fall down, scrape your knee, and it was, come on, suck it up, get on with it, get back on your bike and go. And it's ingrained. It very hardwires into your brain. And then when we get into relationships, and because we've been kind of pigeonholed in being that tough guy, and we're the provider and the mentor, and we're the guardian and the protector and all these things, and it's overwhelming. Having been there myself, it was one of those things where I was married before, and it contributed to that relationship ending as well. And when we get to that point, now all of a sudden, because of society's expectations, and sometimes our spouses' expectations, because of what society has passed on, we don't want to talk about anything that will make us vulnerable, and any less of the man that the person married. So you have people that, for example, they lose their job, for example, and now they're not the provider anymore. And that's a huge thing for men, in the sense that I am very much less of a man than I was, and I'm now, and they internalize it. They don't talk about it. They won't talk about it amongst themselves. And when they do that, they get to a point where I can't do this anymore. And they do take their life. And I was interesting. I wrote an article for a magazine in Australia all around depression and men, and how they handle it or don't handle it. And I was quoting UK statistics where, I can't remember the exact number. Like in the UK, there's X number of suicides per year, and I think that it was like 73.6% are men. And then I went and I quoted to, and somebody suggested that, well, if you're writing an article for an Australian magazine, why not quote Australian statistics? Because nobody cares what happens in the UK. So I looked it up, and it was within like 0.3. It was like 73.3 instead of 73.6. It was almost exactly the same, which was really scary, because, men have difficulty, and it's getting better. Like, there are people that are coming out, and in the sense that they're expressing their mental wellness challenges, which is good. And that's kind of, the awareness is starting to spread because of all that, and which is good, because men hide it so easily, and they don't want to they don't want to step away from that stigma that society has put on men in general. Brene Brown, in her book, one of her books, she was signing a book signing, and just to illustrate that example, and there was a man and his wife and his two daughters, and they came up, the two daughters and the wife had the book signed, and as they were walking away, he was still standing in front of her, and she got kind of nervous, and she said, like, can I help you? He says, yeah. Says, I really do understand about shame and vulnerability, and because we men, we live with that every day. And she said, oh. I said, and he asked her, where do you get your research? She says, well, I interview women. And he says, well, that's convenient. And she felt really, really uncomfortable. And then he finished off the conversation by saying, see that woman over there with those two girls? They would rather see me die on my white horse than watch me fall off. And that was a very powerful message, because there's so many men that are in that situation where they try to, and men have habitually try to figure things out before they want to talk about it, and we never do. So we never end up talking about it. And that's why there's a lot of relationships that are actually struggle because of that.
Yeah, it's so there's so many ways we could go from that. There's so many stuff in that. But sure. While we were talking, I was actually wondering how much, because this is in part, this is a construction from the society we live in. So how much we as female get trapped into that as well, into expectations that then we put upon our partners, but in the first place, maybe we wouldn't if we weren't taught that way.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's awareness. I mean, people have to talk. It's about communication. And men talk a different language than women, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And the what's his name? Gray wrote a book, Men Are From Venus, and Women Are From Venus, Men Are From Mars. And then some divine being decided to put us all on the same planet and just watch what happens. And you hear it often that, they say, well, women, we don't understand you men, and men say exactly the same thing. And I think it's just an awareness that needs to be cultivated. And I think one of those things is how you actually engage a conversation. And I always use the example of something's happened, and one of the other is upset. Usually the woman's upset because when he gets home, say he's late, he says, you always do this, you never do this, and right off the bat, all he wants to do is defend himself. No, wait, now I did this last week, and I did, I was on time the last 2 weeks. It's not about that, because as soon as he gets defensive, and I've been in that situation before myself personally, there's no communication, nobody's listening to anybody, and then it's just a bun fight back and forth. Whereas if the opening statement was, you're late today, this made me feel like this, and I don't think that that's a great place for us to be. Now, right off the bat, I'm not being defensive. I'm saying, yeah, you know what, maybe you're right, and I need to fix this, and so that we can sort of find a better space for each other. And I talk about that in the book, in the sense that one of the issues that we had was, and I call it sort of a personal space that you're both in. And sometimes one or the other partner moves out of that space. They got 1 foot out for whatever reason. So when that one foot steps out, we're smart human beings. We know what's going on. And sometimes there's a fear to bring up that conversation, because sometimes you're afraid of what the answer is really going to be. But most of the time we like to see both ourselves inside that space, and then every now and then one or the other person moves outside of that, and that's when the conversation needs to take place to pull that person back in, for whatever those reasons are. When you find yourself both of yourselves outside of that space, that's when it gets really, really difficult, because that's where for me personally, I mean, that's when the disconnect started. So I mean, in the end, it's all about communication and loving communication. And it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be mad, as long as you come back. You can just engage at that point. And as long as you come back to that conversation after the heart rate settles down, because, you can get emotionally hijacked, as they say, and then you're really not even listening to what you're saying. You just want to hurt the other person verbally, emotionally. And and when that happens, we don't forget that stuff. We always remember like the hurt, the bad stuff, and that gets hardwired as well. So it's about communication that's open, understanding, and that creates a higher awareness of where you are as an individual. Because I'm starting to ramble here now, but like we all bring different experiences, life experiences into a relationship. And when we get into a relationship initially, we're very loving, the honeymoon period, and we never ask those questions like, what does money mean to you? What does intimacy mean to you? Like, we don't ask those questions to really understand what that person is about. And then when these petty little things happen and we get angry, we don't understand the anger behind what's being said. We don't understand the history, because that history was never brought forward on an emotional level, but it's never talked about. So, couples could give themselves a huge benefit by having those conversations in the beginning. And that way you really understand that person a lot more, in the sense of, where those emotional sort of challenges come from. And I think that's really important. I think we wait too long.
Yeah, and then it becomes a big conversation. Like, people talk about difficult conversations all the time, and I don't agree, actually, because it's an uncomfortable discussion. Maybe it's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's not difficult. Actually, not having the conversation makes things more difficult.
I agree with you, but me as a man, I thought it was better not to have that conversation, because I didn't want to go there. I did not want to be uncomfortable. That was a huge thing for me.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned earlier, to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, well, that's a huge step, because now you're in a situation where, I don't want to ask this question because I'm afraid of what the answer is going to be. Maybe she's not in love with me anymore. I don't want to know that. I'd rather live in misery with this person than actually open up that can of worms. Like, I was that guy. So going into those uncomfortable places is very important. Very important. Doing.
Thank you very much. And thanks for you, everyone, for listening. So if you like what you hear, check the website integrallyalive.com for the show notes. Leave a comment. I love reading your feedbacks. Subscribe to the podcast and rate it on iTunes, so you will help more people get access to this information. And till next time, until then, keep sparking life and going from alive-ish to alive. Bye, à bientôt.